Guys on Zoom, you're all in, that's great. So now, welcome everyone to the Irish American Heritage Museum and our spooky, we hope, talk with Dr. Dara Downey, who teaches at Trinity College Dublin and is the editor of the Irish Journal of Gothic and Horror Stories, as well as the Irish Journal of American Studies. So everyone should read, first of all, the Journal of Gothic and Horror Stories. How amazing is that? She has written several books or edited several collections too, but one of her main ones is American Women's Ghost Stories in the Gilded Age. And of course, that's what she's going to talk to us about tonight. Well, the role of the superstitious Irish servant girl in American Gothic literature. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Downey. I'll spotlight you for everyone, and you can share your screen too whenever you're ready. And we'll be delighted to hear it. So thanks very much, and welcome to the Irish American Heritage Museum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me. It's really brilliant to be here. So I'm just going to do that thing where I narrate, clicking around the place. So just 1 minute there. And then I'm going to, oh no, that was the wrong button.
Oh yeah, I know, isn't it terrible?
It really, you think you know what you're doing, and then suddenly everything's after, yeah, I know. Okay, hold on, come on, slideshow, please. There we go. Okay, so hello, my name is Dr. Dara Downey, and as Elizabeth very kindly just said, yeah, a lot of my work up until this point has been on American Gothic and specifically on ghost stories by American women writers from around the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. And while I was doing that book, it kind of struck me that I was focusing very much on the sort of white middle-class ladies of the house, and that in fact there were large numbers of people in these stories who were being ignored both by me and by the stories themselves, but that they were also playing a very important part. And as I was saying to Elizabeth before this, I had spent a lot of my professional life avoiding Irish literature to a certain extent, because the way that we're taught it back in Ireland isn't always quite as exciting as it is in other countries. But I kind of started to realize that a lot of the servants who were showing up in these stories that I was looking at were either Irish American or African American. And so today I'll be talking to you about the Irish American end of things, be a little bit of a whistle stop tour. And, you know, if people have any questions afterwards, we can do that. So hopefully I won't keep you too long. So, okay, when it doesn't go forward, come on. There we go, right. So, like I say, while I was writing my last book, I kind of really realized just how many stories there were out there by American women writers that featured servants, and particularly female servants, in kind of prominent narrative roles. And a couple of them that I came across now, this is really just a very small selection, but sort of one of the more prominent ones, I think, one of the more kind of straightforward ones is Edith Wharton's story, The Lady's Maid's Bell. Which is a cracking read, by the way. I would highly recommend it. It's quite upsetting, actually, by the end of it. You sort of end up in the position of this sort of new lady's maid who was trying really hard to save her mistress from a terrible husband, and is being sort of warned about the terrible things that the terrible husband is doing by the ghost of the previous lady's maid. Unfortunately, it doesn't go very well. Now, can people hear me? I may have to turn off my video.
It was just a tiny bit right there of interference, but before that you were fine.
Grand, and I do repeat myself a lot. So yeah, if I crackle for a little bit, I'll end up saying the same thing again. Okay, so yeah, so this is your kind of basic trope where there's a bad thing happening, maybe a supernatural thing happening. The servant sort of helps the lady of the house through the supernatural episode, either successfully or unsuccessfully. And one of the more interesting examples, I think, of this is by a woman called Josephine Descombe Bacon. And she has a series of short stories called The Strange Cases of Dr. Stanchion, which are all told from the point of view of a psychologist who sort of visits people's houses. And this one, it's a real tearjerker. You can find it really easily online, but again, the main character is a lady's maid, and her new mistress, you know, the lady's maid is new to the house. She doesn't know a lot of what's going on, and she's convinced that the mistress has lost two small children. And to make the mistress feel better, she starts kind of, putting their toys under trees and, doing their little beds at night and stuff. And in the process, she basically produces ghosts. And yeah, I won't really go any farther than that, but it is very, very eerie and it's very odd. So while in Wharton's story, we get this model where it's the servant who's kind of trying to save or help the mistress. Here, that process actually also means that the servant is closer to the world of the supernatural than the mistress is. And this is kind of very much part of the model of what we get in a lot of these stories. And so again, a later version is Past by Ellen Glasgow. And here, the lady's maid can actually see the ghost of a former wife that the mistress can't see. And it's very tense. Sort of, scenes at the dinner table where the maid is looking at the ghost and the ghost is looking at the husband and the husband is looking at the wife, and no one really knows who's looking at who. And it's very tense. But again, it's a mediating role that is being played by these servant figures. And personally, I think, my slide looks a little, okay. So sorry, I keep forgetting that the, what you call them?
Notes.
The subtitles chop off the end of my thing. But so essentially what I think happens in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw is that this kind of triangular relationship between mistress and the supernatural gets kind of upset because the master of the house in Bly in The Turn of the Screw isn't there, and he essentially gives the governess too much power. And so we don't get this kind of triangle of power between the three things, and therefore I think all hell breaks loose, right? So essentially this is our kind of basic model, right? This is what's going on sort of Anglo-Protestant middle class, upper middle class women and or men, sort of standing between them and the supernatural in one form or another. So this essentially, I think, kind of takes on slightly different connotations when the servant is specifically kind of marked as having an ethnic or a racial identity.
We lost you again.
Which obviously
Dara.
adds. I'm sorry.
Just your voice for 1 second.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, no worries. Can you hear me again now?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Am I back?
So just after racial identity.
Okay, I don't think I said anything terribly important. But yes, so yeah, the sort of if the servant is sort of marked or attached to a specific ethnic or racial identity, then you get like kind of a ratcheting up of the realm of the supernatural and of the relationship between the servant and the supernatural. And yeah, when we get this with Irish servants, there is a lot of stuff going on, specifically in relation to turn of the century America and the way that Catholicism kind of was developing in America at the time. And as Colleen MacDonald says, sort of, during this period, sort of more or less following the Great Famine in Ireland, when there were a lot more Irish Catholics in America, there was kind of a fairly major attempt to clean up American Catholicism, to disentangle it from all of those associations with superstition and folklore and all of the rest of it. Now, that was what was happening in the church itself, but popular culture was a little slower to catch up. Popular culture was still very attached to the idea of the Irish as being fundamentally linked to the supernatural. And so, as MacDonald says, the kind of the clergy and the Catholic establishment worked really hard to detach Irish Catholicism from things like priestly magic, pilgrimages to holy wells, and beliefs in fairies, and to replace them with a more kind of unified sense of church doctrine, the kind of community spirit, and with more regular worship. Because on the one hand, the Irish in America really liked going to mass, and on the other hand, they weren't particularly attached to doing that in a regular fashion. They wanted to do it when they wanted to do it. And the kind of the devotional revolution that happens following the famine tried to tidy that up a little bit to make things more regular. And so one of the things that I will talk about a little bit later is Margaret Atwood's novel Alias Grace, which is sort of contemporary novel, but it's set actually in the earlier 19th century. And while Grace is actually Protestant, she comes from the north of Ireland. In my reading of it, what happens in the novel is that she gradually ends up kind of accruing to herself a lot of the associations with the supernatural and with superstition that just go along with Irish maidservants anyway, that she gets turned into the stereotype. And so we get this kind of moment fairly early on where she takes a new job and she finds her employer asking if she were a Catholic, because if she were Catholic, then the employer would have nothing to do with her, because all Catholics were superstitious and indeed rebellious papists. So this, again, is like it's a kind of a conglomeration of associations. It's not just that the Irish were superstitious, but also that they weren't sort of properly middle class, and all of that was associated with the fact that the Irish had a reputation for attempting to have a revolution every now and then, not really getting very far with it, but with resisting authority. And you get an awful lot of cartoons from around the end of the 19th century and moving into the start of the 20th, where Irish maidservants being various kinds of insubordinate to their employers, who were generally depicted as much more refined in their clothing and in their facial features. And I don't know how much you can actually see this picture with there we go. But yeah, so what's happening in this cartoon here is that the mistress is saying, Bridget, you've broken as much china this month as your wages. Now, how can we prevent this occurring again? And Bridget, with her particular sort of features that tend to show up in these, says, oh, I don't know, Mum, unless he raises me wages. And yeah, there's all kinds of things that this could potentially mean, but this is the kind of thing that shows up. So they're both superstitious and they're overly rebellious. They can't be contained within the sort of middle class realms of respectability. On the other hand, these Irish maidservants were plentiful. They were willing to work. A lot of the time, sort of American-born young ladies were raised to see themselves as too good for domestic work. And this was part of why the Irish-American servant really kind of dominates popular culture and popular images of the servant class in America at this particular time. So why was all of this a problem? And why was this specifically a problem for the Gothic, or something that showed up in the Gothic? And one of the reasons, as people may know, is to do with the fact that Catholicism was seen as being sort of overly attached to the physical realm. It was too concerned with images, with idolatry, with crosses and statues and all of the rest of it. And this is something that shows up again and again in all kinds of Gothic literature, but I think particularly the one that people might know is Bram Stoker's Dracula. And this is something that I've been sort of grappling with a little bit myself over the last couple of years, is how does it work that this is a story where almost all of the characters, except for Van Helsing, Van Helsing, almost all of them are more or less Protestant. I'm using this in a very broad sense, very, very broad sense, not thinking about kind of denominations and all the rest of that, but more or less, we're not really told what kind of Protestants they are, but some class of Protestants. And many of the characters are in fact actively uncomfortable with the physical trappings and the iconography of Catholicism, or with other forms of religion that aren't as kind of hardline about kind of being iconoclastic and getting rid of all of that messy physical stuff that was seen as being overly superstitious and overly attached to the things of this world. So this is what happens when Jonathan Harker shows up in Transylvania. So obviously not Catholic, but not Protestant enough. And people realize where he's going, and someone presses a crucifix into his hand. And he has this moment, Jonathan does, where he's like, okay, I don't know how I feel about this, but also, I guess, like, why not? So he says, it is odd. So he's realizing that everything's feeling a little bit strange in Transylvania. He's looking at this crucifix that he's holding, and he thinks, it's odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous, should in a time of loneliness and trouble be of help? Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? And we don't really get an answer for this question in the rest of Dracula. In fact, I think in lots of ways it raises more questions about the kind of the efficacy of crosses and the hosts than it answers. But certainly it becomes quite clear around chapter 14, which is a very important chapter in Dracula, that they really need to stop being wary of this stuff. If they want to defeat the Count, if they want to stop him from spreading his contagion all the way through England in their nice, neat middle-class world, then they need to actually kind of accept that all of this stuff is important and that it's efficacious. So this is where we find in chapter 14 that Van Helsing finally knows what's going on. He's gone off to Amsterdam. He comes back and he shows the men who were trying to save Lucy at this stage from whatever is happening to her. He says, I have the host, I brought it from Amsterdam, and I have an indulgence. And this is, we're getting John Seward, he's the psychologist. We're getting all of this through his diary, and he tells us that learning this appalled the most skeptical of us. And we felt individually in the presence of such earnest purpose as the professors, a professor which could thus use, use the most sacred of things, it was impossible to distrust. So we get this kind of, it's like a gradual progression from Jonathan at the start going, not sure about this crucifix thing, I guess I'll hang on to it, you'd never know, to John Seward saying, well, okay, this was obviously a big deal. We feel a bit funny about it, but yeah, this is what we're going to have to do. And if you're interested in kind of learning more about the religious elements of all of this, it's been chopped off there by the subtitles, but Victor Sage's book, Horror Fiction in the Protestant Tradition, has some really interesting things to say about Dracula and about kind of specifically the Count's excessive attachment to earthly and physical things. Sage says the reason why the Count is such an abomination is because he refuses to move on after death. He refuses to relinquish the physical body, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be delighted to leave behind the earthly things of this world and move on into heaven. And so in a way, I guess it, if we run with this reading of Sage's, it makes sense that the only way to fight this kind of not properly Protestant attitude towards physical things is to embrace a not properly Protestant attitude towards physical things. So I think Dracula is, it's very uncomfortable about all of this, but it's also quite interesting, considering it's a book that doesn't talk about Irishness very much, but there's a lot of this stuff going on in the background. So I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but chapter 14 is also the moment where the men aren't just accepting that, the host is going to work, but they're also trying to accept that the supernatural is really happening in their world. And I always find it quite sweet that they say things like when John Seward, he says at this point, do you mean to tell me there is such a thing as that it's here in London in the 19th century? And they do keep saying this, like it's the 19th century, for God's sake, bang up to date. It's quite nice. They think that they're terribly modern. We feel like they're very old fashioned, but the point is that they do feel like they've moved beyond all of this kind of stuff, that the Count stands in for all of that superstition and idolatry and all of the rest of it that they should have moved beyond. And he's trying to drag them back into this world of death. And yeah, so Van Helsing gives Seward a big talking to, says, you need to cop on. Just because you're a man of science doesn't mean that you don't, doesn't mean that you know everything about the world. And in fact, if you're a real scientist, you will open your mind and stop being prejudiced. And this for me, I know I seem to have kind of moved away from the servants a little bit, but this is actually kind of the essence of a lot of 19th century ghost stories and Gothic tales generally, in which we get middle class, roughly Protestant characters struggling with the fact that something is happening in their lives that doesn't fit in with their worldview. Right? This is the big thing. I often think that, in these stories, when a ghost appears, one, they're afraid of the ghost because ghosts are scary, but they're also afraid of what the ghost implies about the world, that they think that they're living in a world where everything is rational and makes sense, and when you die and everything ends or whatever, you move into heaven. But suddenly the ghost is upsetting all of that. They don't know what's real anymore. And so this is again, it's chopped off a little bit, but there's a critic, a theorist called Tsvetan Todorov, and he has a book called The Fantastic, A Structural Approach to a Literary Genre. And he has this really useful term, the fantastic, which he describes as, quote, that hesitation experienced by a person who knows only the law of nature confronting an apparently supernatural event. And often he kind of says in a lot of texts, we're there with the protagonist. We don't know, is this really real? Particularly in something like The Turn of the Screw, where we're doubting, we're trying to work out, is this actually a ghost? Is it a hallucination or whatever? But the fantastic is for him, it's that moment where you can't work it out one way or the other. And it's also that kind of freaked outness that we get on the part of these protagonists saying, I can't accept this. This is just not fitting in. And so for me, it's the role of the servant, and specifically, I think the Irish American servant, to act as an intermediary between the protagonist and the situation that just is not fitting within their brain at all. So, for example, we get this in Henry James's story, The Jolly Corner, which, if you haven't read it, it's a bit heavy going at the start, and then it really picks up in the second half, and it's very atmospheric. I won't ruin for you what happens, but yeah, it's very creepy, and it'd be good around this time of year. It's set in New York as well. So there's, much like in many of these stories, there is an Irish housekeeper who doesn't have a huge part to play, but she has enough of a part to play. And I really like this quotation generally. So the main character, Spencer Bryden, has been living in Europe all of his life, and he comes back having inherited this old house that used to be his family house in New York. And in fact, he's inherited two houses. And he starts getting kind of slightly obsessed with this house, and he creeps around in the dark. And he, starts to imagine that he's seeing things, but he's playing with the idea of seeing things. He's not really taking it seriously. And he imagines that he's being haunted by the doppelganger of the person he would have been had he stayed in America rather than going back to Europe. But it's really this moment where he talks to his housekeeper that we as readers are kind of alerted to the fact that maybe this isn't just a metaphor after all. Maybe Spencer Bryden is actually seeing something in his house. So Mrs. Muldoon, the housekeeper, sort of corners him and says, can't be doing this anymore. And we're told that the fact there was nothing to see didn't militate for the worthy woman against what one might see. And she put it frankly that no lady could be expected to, could she, creeping up to them top stories in the able hours. The gas and the electric light, we're told, were off in the house, and she fairly evoked a gruesome vision of her march through the great grey rooms, so many of them as there were too, with her glimmering taper. So she hasn't absolutely said that she's seen things, but she hasn't not said that she hasn't seen things either. And I do think that this is a turning point in the story where we and Spencer Bryden need to kind of start taking this apparition a bit more seriously. So she's kind of almost a canary in the coal mine here. She is working in this house, being there at times when he's not there, moving around into bits of it that he wouldn't necessarily go into, which is the whole point of what servants do. They actually kind of occupy a house more than the owners or the masters or whatever, because they're in all of it and they're cleaning it. So it makes sense that they might see things that their employers don't. So where am I going with all of this? So we do get a couple of stories, again, kind of from the first few decades of the 20th century, when generally actually in popular culture, kind of depictions of the Irish in America had become a little more sympathetic, not entirely, but we were sort of moving towards a point where Irish immigrants were kind of standing up for themselves and saying, you can't just keep lampooning us the whole time, we're actually people here. And so there's kind of a bit of a wobble, I think, in terms of how they're depicted. this story here, George Wood Pangborn's Broken Glass, is a very good story, actually. I really enjoy it. And so we get two middle-class women, both of whom are employing servants. And one of them is particularly unhappy because she says that her Irish servant girl is dreaming the happy hours away the whole time, not paying attention to when, the child might potentially be in danger. And so the mother is telling her friend, I think I'm going to have to let our young Irish servant girl go. This just, she's not working out, which was something that happened quite a lot in kind of, in real life. And she has her chat with her friend, she's walking home, and she sees a sort of mysterious lady in a shawl, and they have a slightly odd encounter, and the mysterious lady tells her that actually she really needs to look after the servant girl because she's young, she's vulnerable, she doesn't have family around her, and there are lots of other servants in the house, some of whom are male, who might have a more predatory attitude. And when the woman in the shawl sort of like vanishes in a slightly ghostly way, this is where our main character goes, oh, maybe I should actually pay attention to this. Something has really happened here. This is actually kind of a big deal. She goes back and they actually bond a bit. They have a chat. It's nice. It's actually quite a positive story in lots of ways. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, actually a good few years beforehand, had actually she'd written this essay called Servants, and she does spend a bit of it giving out about her Irish servants, but she also then turns to her sort of Anglo-Protestant middle-class readers and appeals to them to be a bit more sympathetic. So she says, imagine our own daughters between the ages of 16 and 24, untaught and inexperienced in domestic affairs, shipped to a foreign shore to seek service in families. And she says they're often the age of our own daughters, standing for themselves without mothers to guide them in a foreign country. So this is kind of, we're moving towards a slightly friendlier version of the mistress-servant relationship, which was really quite fraught because of the kind of things that I was saying, not just about superstition, but about kind of, Irish servant girls had a reputation for standing up for themselves, for demanding higher wages, for not really understanding the excessive demands of their mistresses, a lot of the time just being like, you're being ridiculous, why do you need things to be done that carefully? And so, yeah, I think this story is kind of an example of a bit of a détente between them. On the other hand, you get a very different kind of a story in Edith Wharton's quite late All Souls, which is very timely, a little difficult to find online, but a good read. And I personally think that this story is a precursor to Stephen King's Misery, because the narrator breaks her ankle, wakes up the next day with a broken ankle, and all of her servants have vanished. And just like Paul Sheldon in Misery, she has to drag herself painfully around her house because she doesn't actually know how to deal with her house without her servants there. She doesn't know how to turn on the fire. She doesn't understand what the radio is. Nothing is really working. And it eventually sort of transpires that there's a sort of head servant who's actually Scottish rather than Irish. And this is one of the things that I kind of wanted to point out as well, that I've been talking a lot about Irishness, but sometimes this blurs out into sort of Scottishness or sort of Welsh identity as well. It's generally subsumed into a kind of larger Celtic fringe where all of those people believe in those slightly strange things that we don't really believe in, but we also find them kind of attractive, is one of the things that happens in these kind of stories. But yeah, I would highly recommend reading All Souls because it's very atmospheric. And just even the kind of the slowness of this woman dragging herself around a house that has become alien to her in the absence of her servants, who are off doing their own supernatural stuff, rather than, as in the other stories that I've discussed, helping her to deal with her supernatural problems. So this is, I think in both of these stories, the Irish and or Scottish servants take control of the situation rather than being in that kind of subordinate position. And I have a quotation here from Kathleen Lynch Brennan, hello, about how, and I do think in a way that this story kind of dramatizes some of the issues around the way that Catholicism sort of ultimately demanded that servants go off to mass every Sunday, no matter what, which did not always go down well with their employers, because this disrupted meal times in particular. It was seen as being kind of, well, we can't possibly plan for this. And it was also part of the kind of the rebelliousness and the standing up for themselves that I was talking about. Okay, so I'm going to power through a little bit. So we get a kind of a gap between, I think, Edith Wharton's All Souls and things popping up again towards the end of the 20th century. And I think some of this is the kind of, I guess we get from the 90s onwards. If you think about the adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola one, this is kind of something of a Gothic revival in popular culture, in American popular culture. And suddenly servants start to kind of pop up again a little bit. And a lot of the time, they tend to revert to that very basic model of the servant as mediator. So, for example, in the film The Others with Nicole Kidman, the servants, I don't want to spoil it, but they're certainly more comfortable with the ghostly than Nicole Kidman's character is, and that works out in a whole pile of interesting ways. At this stage, I know it was probably a long time ago, but if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to tell you what happens. But certainly the kind of the close association between particularly Mrs. Mills, who is an Irish actress, and she has a wonderful Irish accent in this, the association between her and the ghostly that Nicole Kidman is dealing with, it gives you precisely that kind of triangular relationship again that I was talking about earlier. We also get this in, so there are two novels by this woman called Elaine Bergstrom that they literally pick up Bram Stoker's Dracula from the point where Mina's diary kind of drops off in the original book. And so her first book is just called Mina, and it's very close to Dracula. Actually, some of the language, she kind of reuses it. She gives us diary entries from Mina's point of view while they're still in Transylvania. And all kinds of exciting things happen to Mina when they get home, mainly because she finds Jonathan quite boring. But what happens in this book is that it turns out that Dracula's not really dead, and certainly his three vampire wives are very not dead. And so in the, for complicated reasons that are never really explained properly, but so in the sequel, Blood to Blood, one of the wives makes her way to England because of complex plot-related reasons. But while she's finding her way back to England, on a ship, she meets an Irish servant girl who becomes almost kind of the exact opposite of what I've been talking about. So instead of helping a sort of non-believing mistress to navigate the world of the supernatural, she helps a supernatural mistress to navigate the world of sort of upper middle class England. And she does also literally feed Dracula's wife with her own blood, and herself becomes a vampire in the end. But really, it is that same kind of mediating thing. And again, we get this in the recent Netflix series Van Helsing, which is very silly, but good fun. And in season 3, the main character, who is supposedly a descendant of Abraham Van Helsing, she goes back in time to China in the 1890s, again, for complicated reasons. But again, she meets a servant, and the servant is Irish. And the servant, again, helps her to kind of understand what's going on around her with a particular kind of empire that she's never come across before. The servant is also she's quite forward-looking. She has all of those rebellious, standing up for herself qualities that come along with the sort of stereotypical Irish servant girl. So yeah, you get a certain amount of kind of popular culture manifestations of this that really mirror the kind of things that I was talking about earlier. And then on to my very last slide. There's also a few more things that are, I think, attempting to complicate this slightly. So one of them is Valerie Martin's novel Mary Riley, and less so the film adaptation with Julia Roberts, which is kind of a bit more concerned with I don't know, the sort of psychosexual relationship between Dr. Jekyll. So this is a sort of a reimagining of Jekyll and Hyde from the point of view of a sort of entirely made up servant girl who's called Mary Riley. And in the novel, we're not really told that she's Irish. She seems to be more or less from the north of England. She has the odd kind of, the way that she talks, she tends to say, you know, I do be thinking, and she uses those quite kind of Hiberno-Irish ways of talking about things, but she's not really sort of Hibernified in that way, though Julia Roberts really goes to town with the accent. She keeps topping these lists of worst Irish accent in a film ever. In fact, I think she beats herself to the top spot in Michael Collins. So she takes the 2 top spots in a couple of lists that I've come across. But what I think is interesting about Mary Riley is that for once, the servant girl gets a voice. She gets to tell the story. And actually, in this, certainly my reading of Mary Riley is that when she starts meeting Mr. Hyde, he's also quite vampiric. For whatever reason, there's a lot of kind of vampire stuff going on here. And he does try and kind of tempt her over to his side to make her, you know, insubordinate and a bit rough and not properly sort of upwardly mobile in the way that the Irish servant is supposed to be. And she resists him. She says no. He even tries to bite her at one stage. And she's like, no, I'm attached to Jekyll. I don't want to be part of your kind of rough and ready world. So in a way, this is kind of, I think it's a story about the upward mobility of Irish servants. Now, this is obviously set in London, but Martin is an American writer. And yeah, there's always a kind of a bit of a sense that the past is really, you know, it's on this side of the Atlantic, not in America. It's always going to be over there. So this I think is kind of one development. Another one is Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace, which I mentioned previously. And as I said at the start of this talk, I think that this is kind of almost a fable about the sort of Catholic stereotype process happening to all Irish servants, whatever their original kind of denomination or heritage or whatever, that she becomes kind of swept up by the stereotype in the exact sort of opposite direction to Mary Riley's resistance of all of that. And then I don't know if people have heard of See What I Have Done by Sarah Schmidt, but it's great fun. Though it's also quite disturbing, I have to say. It sort of leaves you feeling a little odd about lots of stuff, but it tells the story of Lizzie Borden, who was a famous murderess. And again, we get an Irish-American servant, and she, just like Mrs. Muldoon in Henry James's The Jolly Corner, she sees things that the rest of the family don't see. She might even really know whether Lizzie Borden did kill her parents, or if someone else did it. But ultimately, she just kind of says, no, not having any of this. She refuses the role that is generally put onto the Irish-American servant girl, and she just leaves, which I think is great. So I don't know where we're going to go from this, but I'd like to think that maybe there will be more complex depictions of these figures in future sort of vaguely Gothic versions of historical fiction. Thank you very much.
Great. I can't unmute myself.
Oh no, you're good.
Oh good, okay, great. Oh God, my Zoom has gone a bit crackers. So yeah, that was amazing, Dara, thank you. It's so interesting to see the connection. Henry James, of course, you know, his grandfather was an Irish immigrant who settled in Albany, and so that's a lovely little tie-in as well.
That's very nice.
Am I not? Is the Zoom okay?
You're fine. You're fine.
Oh yeah,
Perfectly clear.
Yeah.
Good.
You're fine.
So,
Fine.
does anyone have any questions or comments? I'm sure there must be a few.
Oh Lord.
I have one, Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Please. Yeah.
I was really interested, Dara, in the second Bridget cartoon that you used. It's not in my book, but I use that when I do presentations. The one where you have this big muscular Bridget who's towering over the little. What I wanted to ask you about was what you thought of what she's wearing. Did you notice what the dress has on it?
hold on one second. I'm just going to
Yes,
remind
pull it
myself
up.
of that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I will actually. That's a good idea. Sorry, if I can make it do that again. Share screen. And rate what I'm doing. Okay, so hold on. Oh, come on. It never does what you want it to.
No. Of course not. That's the rule.
There we go.
Not that one.
Oh, not that one. Oh.
Not that one. Although look at her face for a minute. Because it's true in both. Look at her face, in the Bridget face in there. If you can enlarge that at all. Doesn't it look simian to you?
Very. Yes. I was trying quite hard not to say the word simian, but yes,
oh, why not? I say it all the
does.
time because and African Americans, when I talk about this, I'm always amazed at African Americans. My audience will look at me like, what? Because they're not aware that the Irish were portrayed as simian before the blacks were, or at the same time. And it always makes a good connection, I think, to them, sort of. No, but like to look at her face. Then go to the next one and it's her dress that fascinates me. She also looks simian. The other cartoon you had. This one I've never seen before. That's cool.
Oh, this one, yes. And sorry, I actually have also
here you go. That's the one. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, everything is moving around now.
Oh, they always move around the wrong. Whoops. It never fails.
Yeah. Oh no. Right. Okay. Hold on. I'll unzoom there for a second.
Yeah. The one
Sorry,
right here.
I also mistyped your name there. That's mortifying.
Don't be too upset. I saw that too, but I have a sister named Kathleen, so she wouldn't care.
Okay, there we go. Now
all right.
Yes.
Look at her dress. When I did this on screen, it's an orange shamrock.
Ah,
he's wearing orange shamrocks.
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Dress.
Okay.
And when I always just let people look at that and think, I don't know what you think about, but I have a theory. My theory is the cartoonist is saying H is all. I don't care if you're Catholic or Protestant, because
yes.
see, she looks so
amazing.
simian. And then when I blew it up and I said, my God, I think that's an orange shamrock.
Those are orange shamrocks.
That's what it looks like to me.
That is bizarre. Yeah, that it never occurred to me to zoom in that closely to it. I was just kind of seeing this as like, servants often, as I'm sure spent a lot of their money on extravagant clothing and tended to pick colors and fabrics that their well-to-do mistresses would never have had anything to do with. But goodness, yeah, this is definitely, I really like that point. It's a kind of a lumping together of all kinds of Irish identities. Like you say, don't give two hoots who you are. You're kind of,
because I did sign some ads when I was doing my research that said they didn't want any kind of Irish. They didn't care if you're Protestant or Catholic. No Irish at all need apply. So yeah, I thought this interesting. Well, thanks anyway.
Not at all. Okay, I will stop sharing. Thank you so much. That's okay. I'm gonna have to go tell people about that.
Well, you have to look at it yourself and see if you're saying the same thing I did. But that's what it looked like to me, like an orange shamrock.
No,
not just like
it has the three leaves. That's
the three leaves, and it was orange. And
No, definitely. And those, they're not kind of sprigs like you get on Muslim. Or
right. There wasn't sprigs of flowers or anything.
No.
Funny.
Thank you. I'm gonna write that down.
Amazing. So guys, I do not know what's happening at my end, but I can't see anything on Zoom. So I'm watching you on Facebook. So if the Zoom people want to chime in with a question, they can. But I literally can't see if you've got your hands up or if you're asking a question, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
There's one thing in chat, I can't see it, Elizabeth. Do you want me to tell you what it says? Somebody wrote something.
Yeah.
Now this is from Kelly Vetter to everyone. It says, now you have me thinking Cinderella was talking to a ghost of her grandmother. Maybe she was. That's interesting.
That's a cute idea.
Oh, I never thought of that.
That's an interesting idea.
Good.
And then all the sort of little gambling animals could be the fairies.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, is it Vetter Kelly or Kelly Vetter? I think I had it backwards. I think it's Vetter Kelly. At least that's what it says, but I wonder if there was supposed to be a comma after Vetter. You can correct us, Kelly or Vetter.
Please do.
I'm so sorry. I literally, my screen is white across the thing. I can't, but I can see you all on Facebook. So nobody on Facebook has a question or comment, but it's such a fascinating, when you think about the power dynamics too, because these girls, of course, and you touched on that, the attitude that Americans had to them as, I came across a diary from 1853, and the mistress was giving out about her maid was too well dressed on her day off. And how dare they, and also like how dare they ask for permission to have guests over, and this kind of thing. But at the same time, then when you look at people like the Nun of Kenmare writing those books about advice to servant girls, so I think this thing of them being like a conduit, from the spirit world is another interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, given the power dynamics,
And by the way, her name is Kelly Ann Maureen Williams Fetter. Thank you.
Oh, good.
And I mean, yeah, sort of, moving on from that as well a little bit, like you say, a lot of those advice books were as much about kind of preserving your pure Irish chastity as they were about anything else. And in a way, that kind of preservation of your chastity was actually in lots of ways an act of insurrection in and of itself, when you say, no, I'm not going to just do whatever the man of the house wants me to do, or the other men who are working here. I'm going to actually kind of stand up for myself, be like Richardson's Pamela, and say no. And I think that's actually I have a reread of Alias Grace in my future, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm going to be teaching it in DCU, but that's kind of part of what happens to Mary, I think, in that in a way she gives in, but in a way then she also tries to kind of stand up for her rights, and that is a problem. It's not something that goes very well. And so I think in lots of ways kind of the Gothic is a really useful dramatizing all of this, because it brings to the surface the kind of the tensions that would just be social tensions. Otherwise it makes them kind of, I don't know, it colors them in more loudly.
And in terms of horror trope, that's something that stays with us in modern times, with like, even I think it was the Scream movies sort of mentioned that the good girls, the virgins don't die.
Oh, you've cut out a little. Oh dear.
So I cut out or you cut out? Have we all cut out? Gee, I don't know what's happening.
We can see you.
Good.
Okay.
I can see
that was me,
everybody.
actually. Yeah. I think that was me freezing.
Okay, good. So we heard you right up until you were saying about Alias Grace and her own choice, to give in but not give in, sort of thing, and how to take control of that. So there's no questions still on Facebook, but do ask if you have any. But yeah, so I was just agreeing with you, Dara, that that trope stays in modern horror, where virgins don't get killed, like as recently as the Scream movies, they kind of reference that good girls are safe, so.
You still get terrorized. You just get to kind of win at the end.
Well, that's because they run into the house and up the stairs instead of outside.
Exactly. They've thought it through carefully. They haven't just gone, oh, I don't know, someone else will make a decision for me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Dara, your work is so insightful. Thank you. Really.
So much.
I can't believe the amount of research that you've done to ferret out all these different stories and angles from them and put them together for us. Thank you.
Oh, not at all. Thank you.
I'm delighted. Yeah, you've given us a reading list now.
Oh, excellent.
Right.
Thanks, Jean.
Once you find, kind of one slightly obscure short story, then they just start really coming. And actually, if people are looking for those stories for Christmas, there's another woman who no one ever reads. I'll type her name into the chat there for you. So Elia or Elia W. Peaty, and she has a story which is the weepiest ghost story I have ever read, called Their Dear Little Ghost. I did that properly. And yeah, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but even thinking about it makes me a little bit like, oh God, oh, it's so sad. Because a lot of these stories are, they're sad rather than creepy, or they're sad and creepy all at the same time. And I think that makes them very useful for all kinds of sort of sentimental ideas to be pushed through. And that is often something that then gets used by women writers as a form of kind of almost feminist propaganda, I think, because you're appealing to the emotions.
That was the interesting thing too. I was thinking something about the power dynamics again of like the maids and their otherness, but whatever the thought was has just gone out of my head. But oh no, I remember, like the fact, the blurring of the lines out, that these are real people, you know, in terms of Lizzie Borden's servant. She really was an Irish immigrant, or at least Irish American. And, you know, I think I've read in one or two of those newspaper articles at the start, like, she was a far more likely candidate to have murdered the parents than Lizzie Borden herself was, because she was such a lovely, you know, wasp kind of person. Whereas people would have more likely believed it of the Irish Catholic maid, which I think is so funny, you know. So
yes,
then to read that in literature too, you know, is a bit doubly kind of creepy.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, it's been something that I've been trying to work out for the last while, why there's been this kind of resurgence in that kind of historical fiction in over the last couple of decades, that, like you say, either engages with real historical figures, or, you know, in the way that kind of Mary Riley and the Elaine Bergstrom books do, that they engage with previous literature and they try and rewrite it from a different point of view. And I mean, the kind of the critical commonplace is that it's just a sort of postmodern attempt to give voices to the voiceless, and to, you know, kind of find marginalized figures and to bring them into the center. And I think there is a certain amount of that, but I still feel like I'm not quite satisfied by it. I feel like there's something more going on, and I don't fully know what that is yet, but it's certainly, it's kind of almost a desire to go back and be a detective in the past. But at the same time, I think that kind of books like Alias Grace and See What I Have Done, they actually resist that desire to know the past. They're like, well, you can never really know it. We can never really understand what's going on with people. And, you know, particularly when kind of bad things happen in a house, even the servant who sees everything is not going to be a reliable kind of viewpoint into all of this. So yeah, like I say, I still haven't kind of fully got it worked out, but it's definitely something that is a thing in culture at the moment, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I just read a book recently, God, I forget who wrote it. It was set in Wexford in the 1950s, and like the priest is killed at the very start, so I'm not, you know, spoiler alert, page 1, the priest is killed, but in a Protestant house. I can't remember what that was, but it was so atmospheric. And again, talking, I mean, this obviously set in Ireland and in a relatively modern Ireland, but those power dynamics and the cultural differences between Catholics and superstition, and then the Protestants, you know, as the overlord kind of thing. Very interesting dynamics. And I think tries to get to some of what you're saying, like, that there is this element of trying to give voice to the voices, or to add a story, because the narrator of that book was actually the policeman was Protestant as well. So in a way, he had something in common with the, you know, the landlords, but at the same time, he was a working man, you know, so there was a lot going on there. I can't remember. A very famous Irish author.
I think it was Snow.
Snow, yeah. That was it, Jean. Yeah.
Is that the name of the author or the book?
No, the book was Snow. Was it Colm Tóibín or somebody?
Yes, I can't remember the author. I gave the book to my husband for, and I can't remember.
Very good. Jeannie Mac. John Banville. Yeah, I had to Google it.
John Banville.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I knew it was, So if there's no other questions or comments, I'm refreshing my Facebook to see there's not one or two people who kind of joined in, you know, so yes, the talk is going to be archived and on the website. Dara, this was amazing. We'll probably have to have you back, you know, because I'm sure you can talk to us about other things, and, you know, it doesn't have to be all Gothic or horror. We can get you on the women. And so our next event is November 3rd. It's the War of Independence series. I'm going to be giving the talk about November 1921. And then we have another author from New York next time, Deirdre Sinnott, who's going to talk about her book, The Third Mrs. Galway. And that is online only. She's not in Albany either, so it'll be either Zoom or Facebook. But her book deals with the Underground Railroad in Utica, and sounds very interesting. So we're looking forward to that. But so if anyone has any final comments for Dara, please do make them. And thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. You know, it's great to be able to offer these talks and to engage with people at home in Ireland too. That's the one good thing about the pandemic, and using, even though sometimes our technology lets us down, it has expanded our reach too. So we appreciate you coming on so late at night, Dara. Thank you.
Not at all. And apologies for the typo in the slide again.
Not to worry.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So I'll be in touch And thanks. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm glad it's working, but my Zoom is completely, I can't, see you. So I do not know what's happening. I might not even be able to end the meeting, to be honest. But I'll talk to you, our members soon. And Dara, thank you so much. Or Dr. Downey, I will be in touch.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
So, thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
See you all guys online.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.